Okay, so I know this is a government class, but I'm gonna have to dig into some US history to make sense of what went on with George Floyd last week. Now here's the deal. I wish that I could say that this was just some freak accident. It was not. I wish I could say that these were just a couple of bad actors, one bad cop doing one bad thing on one day. He was one racist guy, and if we get him and we punish him, it's gonna fix the whole system. Not gonna happen, right? The reality is, I can't even say that the system is broken, because to say that it's broken is to imply that it worked in the first place. The system is exactly as it was designed to be. It is not broken. It is working as planned. It's not working for us. It's not working for communities of color, but it is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Because from the outset, this country was designed to benefit certain groups of people at the expense of others. White settlers were permitted to get into violent altercations with indigenous people all throughout American history, right? Our expansion from the Atlantic seaboard to the Pacific has all been based off of stealing land from the people that originally owned it, right? If you even think about the evolution of guns as we think of them today, guns were designed by businesses to sell to the US government to kill indigenous people. The revolver, right? The revolver was designed to allow people who were fighting against the indigenous people in the American Southwest to have a better edge, right? The Comanches were badass people, man, and they wanted to keep their land, right? And so when the Texas Rangers were getting into fights with them, it was taking too long for them to reload their rifles. So what did Colt do? He made a quick 5 shots, and that changed the face of the West forever, right? Again, even business gets involved in propping up the police state's killing of people of color. Slavery, right? Slavery is entirely the backbone of what drove the American economy out of the mud, right? Without slavery, America doesn't become the greatest country in the world, right? Period, point blank. If we did not kidnap people from their homeland, strip them of all of their power, right? Their religion, their language, their families, and force them to work until their deaths, and their children's death, and their children's children's death, we would not have amassed the same kind of wealth that we have today. Fact, right? And so when we think about the police systems that were created in America, they weren't created to be just and good. They were created to support this system. I want to take into account lynching, right? Lynching was the extra legal killings of African Americans in the American South, right? And what would happen is, African American men were accused of various crimes, mainly social, like breaches of social norm, right? And then they were publicly killed. Many of them were hung, castrated, and set on fire, right? And that was some of the less grotesque things that happened to some of the people who were lynched. This was done in public with full knowledge of law enforcement, and sometimes even law enforcement participated in this, right? This is America, right? We have continued to allow for these kinds of killings to happen, right? The death of Emmett Till is another flashpoint in America, right? Because Emmett Till was a young man who was visiting his family in the South. He was accused of making an advance towards a white woman, which she said actually in her deathbed never really happened. And he was beaten and killed. And then when his killers went to trial, they got off. Right? And it was very clear what went on, right? And so this is the history of America. So what happened to George Floyd isn't new, right? Police officers have continuously used excessive amounts of force when dealing with African Americans in response in a way that they wouldn't do with white Americans, right? When you take a look at the history of policing, right? Even in just the last decade, there's lots of instances where police have used violence to get their ends across without there being a need for it. Take Amadou Diallo, right? In 1999, 23-year-old Amadou Diallo was coming home from a meal at 12:40 at night, right? Police mistook him for a serial rapist that had been going around and told him, "Hey, you, over there, show us your hands." He was afraid. He didn't know they were talking to him. He tried to run indoors. He got shot 19 times. They fired a total of 41 shots, hit him 19 times, dead on the spot. He had no weapon. He was not the person they were looking for. And none of the 4 officers who were involved in the shooting saw a single day of jail time for it. They were not even indicted with a murder charge, right? Okay. Other people, the list could go on, right? Let's talk about Eric Garner, right? Eric Garner, who is unfortunately famous for being the one who coined "I can't breathe," was choked to death on the street with a police officer using an illegal chokehold, right? Because he was selling loose cigarettes, right? Screaming, "I can't breathe," died there on the scene. The police officers, it was found that there was no sufficient evidence that they did anything wrong. Didn't serve a day's worth of time. Let's look at Stephon Clark, right? Stephon Clark was in his grandmother's backyard and he was shot 8 times, 6 of which were in the back. And after the investigation, the police found there's not sufficient evidence to charge the police officer with any wrongdoing, right? We could go to, Akai Gurley, right? Gurley. He was walking down the stairs in his apartment building when a police officer shot his gun. It ricocheted, killed him, and the police officer, in that case, only got 5 years of probation for discharging his firearm and killing a young black man who was entirely innocent, right? And I could go on forever, but Tamir Rice was 11 years old. Right? Tamir Rice was playing in a park. Yeah, he had a fake pistol that looked like a real gun, but the police officer who drove up on him killed him within 2 seconds of arriving on the scene. That is a clear sign that there's no benefit of the doubt, right? Because when we look at what happens with white assailants, people who are actually in violent acts directed towards the police have gone out of their way to make sure that those individuals still make it out alive and with some dignity. Just watch for like a quick second.
This is Jared Stephen Leone. He's 18. He's in City Hall in Beaverton, Oregon. And according to him, he's high on mushrooms. So he starts a fight with some cops. They all wrestle, and then Jared grabs a cop's gun and shoots it. More cops jump in. It ends up taking 7 cops 2 full minutes to restrain Jared, and he makes it out alive. This is white privilege. If that idea bothers you, then let's just call it benefit of the doubt. Those cops give Jared the benefit of the doubt that his life matters, that his life is worth saving, even when he takes one of their guns and shoots it.
Okay, so that shows a level of patience that officers are willing to show towards white assailants that they're not willing to show toward black people who are just living their lives, right? Who are just walking down the street, okay? And when we think about this, the system itself is the problem, right? It's not that there's 1 or 2 or 3 bad actors. The system was built this way, right? Because when you look at it, in America today, right, on average, you are 3 times more likely to be killed by a police officer if you're African American than if you're white, right? And you're more likely to be killed if you're unarmed if you're black as well, right? And a lot of people say, well, it's happening in cities that have lots of crime, Shufel, and police officers gotta be, on the ready all the time. I would say that sounds good and it would make sense, but the facts don't bear it out, right? Because the reality of it is if you look at the crime rate in a lot of major cities and compare that number to the amount of police killings, the number has no relationship. There are some places that have lots of crime and they have relatively low police killings. There are some places that have relatively low crime and have lots of police killings. The numbers don't match up. The reality of it is just last year alone, there were only 27 days out of the 365 days of the calendar year where the police didn't kill somebody in this country, right? And that's just crazy for me to think about. When we look at the numbers, it even gets a little more crazy because 8 out of the top largest 100 American cities have higher police killing rates than the murder rates in those cities, which is baffling to me that police are killing more people than people are killing people in 8 of those 100 American cities is just beyond me. But what's really sad and what's really tough about all of this is we don't even know all of the data. There is no single one database where all of this information is being stored. Police don't have to report to anyone outside of their own local areas how many people are killed, right? The only reason why we have some of the data that we do have is because of people who've created organizations to try to track down this information. But in fact, the federal government has explicitly said they don't want to know how bad the problem is, which just goes to show that it's going to continue to perpetuate unless we do something. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with something, and I want you to think about this before I have you do some work. Will police be persuaded to stop if people turn out on the streets to press them? I think that's a valid question to think about, right? I think there's a lot of power in showing unified voice in addressing an issue. But I do want to point something out. Some of the actions that have been taking place on the streets have been strengthening the arguments of the pro-police side, right? The burning down of businesses that are unrelated to the events that happened with George Floyd, while totally understandable from the perspective of a population of people who are tired of being killed on the streets, right? But with that being said, there are people out there, Trump supporters, who are taking this opportunity to say, see, Black people are violent. See, Latino people are violent. See, poor people are just violent. We need to have police. After the riots in 1992, police started to ramp up their military systems, and we're going to take a look at that later on this week. But realistically, usually the response from the police isn't to reflect and learn and grow from these incidents. A lot of the times their response is to get tougher and to crack down harder. So be conscious of what you choose to do and what you choose to say, because what you do leaves a legacy, right? Learning how to change the systems from within is just as powerful sometimes, right? I'm not asking you to sit down and be quiet. I'm asking you to figure out how to use your knowledge in a multitude of ways, okay? So do some work for me, and then I'll catch you in the next lesson.